There was only one day I was in Trieste, but one was just enough. A surreptitious set of events had led me there. The result of a late night with a lot of drinking had led me to a mad dash this morning to the train station. I'd woken up around 8 o'clock, but had only returned at 5. Regrettably, I will admit to have still been drunk, but naturally, when one is in Venice, it's only courteous to do as shown. Smoking cigarettes all night with a cold beer. There really aren't many things better than a cold beer in unfamiliar territory. A city like Venice, it's steeped in history. All day, on any other day, you'd have heard me discussing the Venetians, their schemes, but when in company, you must oblige to an all-out reciprocation, and so, the history had been turned down a dial. We had Peroni on tap. Peroni was in my glass, and after 3 or 4, things can become hazy for any man. Suddenly, as if it were only a few hours past, it was 3 a.m. Stumbling back, my friends and I jumped into a boat in the canal. We took photos of each other and it was a good laugh for all. I took out a cigarette and ventured forward into the steep stones. Upon arriving back to the base, I decided to take out a toast. Limoncellos and 3s. For all. This was very enjoyable. Then I smoked some cigarettes and passed out in front of the fan. Then, as if it were only the second that I had put my head down to the pillow, my alarm rang, and again, the day began. No time for a shower, and with a head that had felt as if it had been put in the toaster too many times, I stepped out into the real world. I was already ready to give in. Then, after 5 more minutes, it finally did sink in. I was sweating profusely, my eyes still limp like an old dog. But alas, as things go, I made the train on time, and after only 1 hour, it had stopped. On the way to Slovenia, Ljubljana, my company and I were to take a small soiree by the sea. Sun in the south, or wherever I was. All I knew were there were 2 lovely girls sat positioned in my vision between the slit of 2 chairs. One with dark, deeply Spanish hair. I guessed Madrid. The other from Germany, I believed. Berlin, perhaps. My company were both asleep, and they looked over at them. We all got caught up at the eye contact intersection. Then we laughed. They were beautiful views. The only thing I would be able to compare it to would be the train journey from Geneva to Montreux. The girls were both pretty in their own ways, but I had my eyes for only one, the dark-haired girl. My accomplice had engaged in some playful conversation with them. The other witness to last night, in the same state as me, antisocial, decided not to engage. But this is when you need the push from a friend, and we made a good effort of it. To the beach we all went then. We shared pleasantries. They were both from Madrid. An interesting twist saw that the 2 girls in fact lived in Berlin. I understood the physiognomy to a fairly comprehensive degree, but at its roots, got it wrong. We got on the bus, and then rode for 5 stops. This bus was packed, and my unkept armpits were above this beautiful lady. She didn't care. Maybe I'm only paranoid. We arrived at the beach, and was fairly disappointed. The reason being that there was no sand, only a long stretch of concrete, canvassed with rocks just handily enough placed to slip into the water. I remarked to the dark-haired girl, who I decided to refer to as the Pearl of Madrid in my head. She told me her name was Clara. This is a name I like a lot, but I'm hesitant of those who enjoy Berlin. Whilst I do enjoy Berlin myself, I do it in my own way, and most of the ways are wrong to me. There is a feeling of a frequency for freedom there. The demeanour and atmosphere of the city, it's a dare. Do you want to have the best night, or the worst night of your life? After the wall fell, liberalism won, and the MacGuffin of the Cold War lay bare there in the centre of a now unified Berlin. 2 worlds, 2 ideologies merging, money or peace and love. These 2 things together, they usually materialise to drugs, and so Berlin seems to operate as if it were a dreamland. I told her, after babbling on in a hormone-induced state. Well, of course I didn't say all that, but I appeased her and informed her some more. I would watch the water drip down her face. Her hair would be soaked and slicked back, and her skin very brown from the sun. Upon returning to the shore, I caught her on her phone texting her father. She'd written that she had met the most interesting guys from England, and that they were in very good company. She added a love heart to the end. The sun and swimming had really done a number on me. Even after last night, however, I seemed fine. I would have put it down to the effort of talking to beautiful women. When you have to flip the switch in an unkept, tired and hungover state, it usually has to be worth it. I looked at their dark eyes as they glistened from the sun's refraction via the window. Her friend was blonde, hence my guess not being Spanish. She'd chosen the burrata sub with rocket and sun-dried tomatoes, and it was then that I knew that she was worth it. With there being 3 of us men and 2 women, a small battleground seemed to become apparent. Whilst my comrade was courting the other girl rather than my friend in the sea, my second associate was interested in the same lady as I was. This was a tennis match of romantic proportions. Every hour we'd switch and talk to her. We'd even discussed this whilst changing into our swimming suits after it had organically appeared as a schedule. I was okay with this, and so was he. We were both having a fairly exhausting day and decided to call it fair game. We'd enjoyed their company nonetheless. I stood at the counter and ordered a large sandwich. It was lambasted over with cheese, provolone, pecorino, burrata, the big guns. Rocket and balsamic with a pesto spread over the internal guts of a beautiful sourdough loaf. I exclaimed, "This calls for wine. Let us drink." I bought a Chianti and we drank it all. There were a lot of cigarettes had been smoked by now, and we were teaching the girls some slang from England. We made a large list. How wonderful. After more wine and more colloquial language, it was time for the bus and to go to the train station. Finally, we would arrive in Ljubljana. It had only been 6 hours. 6 hours, I thought. Wow, time flies when you're on top of your game. This time, the bus was even busier. I managed, but upon getting off the bus, the inspector of tickets had arrived. We had none. He was proposing in a tone that I believed too harsh to allow address from, and that each of us had to pay €70 fine. This was not to my taste. It was a sour chase to what had been a sweet pina colada day. I'd just finished reading Steve Jobs' biography and been telling my fellow comrade of the reality distortion field that Jobs employed to take control of minds. A mental talent of his, driven by attention and eye contact. I placed my hand on the inspector's shoulder in a respectful manner. I would not have done this had there not been girls present, but told him in broken English with my eyes firmly set in a way that some would mistake for being romantic. "We will pay nothing. Bus late and we rush now. We have to get train. No time for ticket." He moved my hand with some aggression, enough to at least justify to his brain that he was still in the right somehow. "We'll pay 1 fine, not 5, he says, and some further chatter from my comrades. It then became nothing, and so we hopped onto the train that was only 7 hours late. 7 hours of late was maybe what I needed today, though. How wonderful that I could be given a moment of respite on the coast with such endearing company. And as I thought this, I began to observe the farmland of Trieste and the opening to Slovenia. I chatted with Clara from the sea. I was sat opposite her and my company were all sat on the other side. I was more than pleased with this. For a whole hour the conversation held firmly grounded in reading, solitude and charity. We both shared a love for reading, but she hadn't heard any of my favourite writers. Hers a little plain, but a woman like her with too wild of a brain would send me into a land of love, so perhaps this is more advantageous to me. Farms were one of the hot topics. We both shared a sincere appreciation of nature. Clara let fly that she'd both lived and worked on farms for a fair few years. No phone, just her books. I'm sorry to say, but I was becoming very carried away in my head. She had asked me to curate a list of my favourite writers to give her. I pulled out my notepad and did so. This I enjoyed. My shoe would bump up against the inside of her leg on every turn. I held it in there a little longer and she was okay with it. She'd look up at me as if she were a naughty child, a cheeky face with a lot more wit than she is letting on as of now. I could tell this as I looked at her smile, as we tumbled along. But then we stopped. Another delay. We were sat but stranded by the wayside. I was not upset by this. I had wanted a cigarette, to be quite honest, but I was worried about losing my seat. The seat was the key. After stepping onto the train, it were as if said key had vanished, and there'd be no business for some light, sun-drenched flirtation. The type that makes you say out loud with a straight face, "Wow, would you just look at those backdrops?" Instead, we were heading for a grey, Soviet-style train with nothing but grey steel interior. It seemed to begin raining outside the second we sat down, and there were large groups of youngsters huddled around the door. They played games, perhaps around 10 of them. They invited us to play. The girls go, but we don't. The mood of the day had changed the second we'd ventured forth into the old Soviet train. Things were grey and rainy. The pent-up energy bubble we had been surviving from had been popped by a depressive needle. I decided some comedy would be a nice way to pass some time. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia was always our first choice. We each shared a headphone, allowing for the excitement from game playing going on in our background remind us of our ignorance to anything not 5'6" and at least the B cup. Those in the circle were the type of traveller we had made many comments in passing about whilst away. Oversized backpacks that impede any ability to walk. The shaved heads and free soles. Beaded bracelets. Something about this shared experience felt false to me. I try my best to not look like a man that travels. We all had, in fact, for this journey, bar one of my comrades. 2 of our bags could fit between our legs and hold but 25 litres, but one needed a seat of its own. We'd made him aware before leaving on the trip that changing it before leaving would be the smartest thing to do. But in doing that, one would have to then accept that their way was wrong, which is a whole lot harder of a thing to do. After another episode, I decided to take a doodle in my notebook, and it had caught the attention of a Nigerian man. I could tell quite quickly he was Nigerian. I'd worked with a man by the name of Charles in the past. Of course this was not his real name, for the Nigerians and their names can be quite confusing, but he was a good fellow. I saw similarities in both. The fake Rolex watch, the bezel and case being the dead giveaway. Anyone with the slightest understanding of the craft could have seen it from a mile off. They both also spoke on a loudspeaker, in public settings, and very loudly, may I add. He engaged us, so we obliged. His interest in my art was not rooted in its quality, it was more akin to a suggestion. He believed that I should be digitising my work, and then selling it online. Online's where the money is made now, he says. I'd agree, but did find what he was saying to be but a simplification of perhaps another point that hadn't quite gotten that far in his head yet. I was cordial. I showed gratuity for his suggestions. Then the conversation turned to crypto, which he believed I should also put my time into. This conversation seemed to entice the girls from their prior engagement. Not the substance of the conversation, but more a lack of anything of a similar vein further down the train. The mood had changed. The time apart between our two groups had instigated some tiredness and perhaps a longing for the other. The train had ground to a halt and we arrived in Ljubljana, only 8 hours late. Stepping off the train and onto the platform, I asked Clara for her number, so we could arrange to all meet up again whilst in the city. Not one of us sent a message, nor attempted a phone call. Why? Even to this day I have no idea. Some tiredness had played a part the first night, but on other evenings there would be no excuse for us to find. It was almost erased from our collective memory and not spoken about again. I often thought about Clara, about what she was doing or where she was. Berlin, Madrid, a farm in Italy. I still had her face etched into my memory for months after. Over time, however, this memory did fade. 1 year later, I'd opened up my WhatsApp and searched a contact. I'm a total ignoramus regarding anything technical, and had little idea that someone could have a photo on their contact card. I'd searched online for Clara. I'd input any connotative thing I could think of alongside Madrid and her name, but found nothing. Yet here she was, filling up my mind again. How wonderful, I thought. For the preceding weeks, I'd sneak a look every now and then. I'd not mentioned this to my friends from the trip. It was my little secret. I'd planned of making a call to her when finally arriving in Madrid. Wonder crossed my mind daily. Would she ignore me, as I'd ignored her? Had she moved? It was all speculation, however, and not to speculate would be ignorance. Any great man should speculate as much as his heart desires, and every great man should yearn, for it is the most humbling of practices. And yearn I did. Then one day, a fairly rainy Tuesday I believe, I was sat at my desk in university and had received an email. It read, Europe photos. This excited me. I opened the folder, and there she was, on that rocky shoreline. A photo had been taken on a film camera, and but 2 years later, it had been uncovered and printed. There she lay, sun-kissed and shimmering with light. It were as if she was the sun, and her smile were bouncing off the salty waves. My head was hanging low as I rolled a cigarette in the photo. It stayed my laptop wallpaper for a long time. Maybe I'll make it to Madrid one day. Clara.